Welcome to Deep Dive Lab, where we break down and, dissect cutting-edge scientific research, from advanced biomedical technologies to breakthroughs in AI, materials science, chemistry, and physics, all told as compelling, easy-to-follow stories.
And today we are actually looking at an incredibly strange contradiction that all of us really probably encounter every single day without even realizing it.
Right, because, if you are scrolling through social media right now or just, walking past billboards on your morning commute, it really feels like we're living in this kind of golden age of fashion
Oh, it
diversity.
absolutely looks that way. Like
Yeah.
if you just compare a fashion magazine from, say, 2005 to one from 2024, the visual landscape just seems completely transformed.
Yeah, totally. We see more diverse skin tones. We see a huge variety of hair textures, different body sizes on the runways. It just feels like the fashion industry keeps, patting itself on the back for ushering in this amazing new era of inclusivity.
They definitely do.
But, and here's a strange question we're exploring in this deep dive. Have our beauty standards actually changed? Or is the fashion industry just running this really clever, like mathematically engineered optical illusion?
Yeah, and that is the exact mystery answered by a staggering new data set that spans 25 years of fashion imagery. It was actually recently published in the prestigious journal PNAS, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences.
Wow.
And the data they uncovered, it just completely flips the script on what we think we are seeing every day.
Okay, let's unpack this because I want to start with what everyone, like myself, completely included here, just assumed was happening over the last decade or so.
Right, the prevailing narrative.
Exactly. The narrative in society was that the thin ideal was just finally dying out.
Right.
With body positivity campaigns everywhere and plus-size models gaining millions of followers, we really believed the industry was genuinely broadening its definition of like what an aspirational body actually looks like.
Yeah, that was the assumption, for sure. But scientists and public health experts, they started noticing this massive, just glaring contradiction.
What kind of contradiction?
Well, if you actually look at the public health data, that whole narrative of a more inclusive, healthier media landscape just completely falls apart.
Really? How so?
Because despite this apparent explosion of diversity on magazine covers, the rise of eating disorders, body dissatisfaction, and all the psychological distress that's linked to media exposure, they haven't dropped at all.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, in fact, they remain these massive, pervasive problems across all genders and age groups.
Right, which raises a huge red flag. Because, if the media we consume is supposedly getting healthier and more representative, the psychological toll it takes on you should be going down.
Exactly. So scientists were left looking at this paradox. If the media really is becoming so much more diverse, why are the negative psychological impacts of these beauty standards still so incredibly high?
It sounds kind of like slapping a fresh coat of paint on a house with a crumbling foundation. Like, we changed the surface, but did the structure actually change at all?
That's a great way to look at it. But historically, proving that has been almost impossible because, how do you definitively measure something as totally subjective as beauty or fashion standards over a long period of time?
Right, I would assume that's just a logistical nightmare. Beauty is famously in the eye of the beholder, all right? You can't just put a vibe into a spreadsheet.
No, you really can't. And historically, until recently, scientists trying to study this just had to rely on very small sample sizes.
Makes sense.
Yeah, they might look at one specific region, which obviously doesn't capture the global nature of the fashion industry, or they had to rely on industry-funded audits.
And let me guess, an industry-funded audit has a pretty vested interest in making the industry look as good as possible.
Shocker, right? So what was really missing was a long-term, totally objective way to quantify physical representation over decades.
Okay, so how did scientists figure this out? Because this is where the story gets incredibly interesting.
Yeah.
How do you quantify the unquantifiable?
Well, they did it by going incredibly big. The lead author of this PNAS study, Dr. Louis Boucherie, and a team of colleagues, they managed to assemble a data set that is honestly almost hard to comprehend.
Okay.
They analyzed 793,199 individual records of professional modeling work.
Wait, what? Almost 800,000 records.
Yes.
Just the logistics of that are mind-boggling. They didn't just look at a few Vogue covers. They basically scraped the entire visual output of the whole fashion industry.
Literally. Over a 25-year period, too. from the year 2000 all the way to 2024. And they looked at fashion shows, magazine covers, advertisements, editorials, you name it.
Wow.
And crucially, they didn't just look at the images and sort of guess. They tracked hard anthropometric data.
Meaning like physical measurements.
Exactly. Precise physical measurements like height, bust, waist, and hips, all compiled from modeling agencies and industry databases.
Oh, that's wild.
And on top of that, they also tracked visible phenotypes. So things like hair texture, eye color, skin tone, and even the national origins of the models. It is honestly one of the most comprehensive records of human representation in media ever compiled.
Okay, so they finally have the hard numbers. When they actually ran this massive data set, what did they find? Because, I mean, we established that the look of fashion has changed, right? Did the data back up that surface-level diversity?
It actually did. The investigation's first major finding is that visually, the industry really did get more diverse.
Okay.
The researchers mathematically proved that the historical dominance of, blonde hair and blue eyes significantly declined over that 25-year period.
That's good.
Yeah, and at the same time, representation of darker phenotypes increased, and there was this really marked rise in models originating from sub-Saharan Africa, East Asia, and South Asia.
Okay, so the faces we are seeing have demonstrably changed. So the industry isn't actually lying about that part.
Yeah.
But you mentioned earlier that there was this optical illusion. So where does the trick come in?
So here is the bombshell from the study.
I'm ready.
While the packaging, like the visible traits in the faces changed, the core measurements of the bodies absolutely did not.
Wait, really?
Really. Over 25 years of changing trends, economic shifts, all those massive social media campaigns for body positivity, the researchers found that the median model physique remained completely rigidly stable.
Hold on. I need to push back on the math here for a second.
Go for it.
If you add a bunch of, say, size 12 and size 14 models to runways and magazines that previously only featured size zeros, the mathematical center has to shift.
Right.
Like, that is just how averages work. It's impossible for it to remain stable unless the math is wrong.
But see, you're thinking of the mean, and the mean is super sensitive to extreme highs or lows.
Okay.
The researchers didn't use the mean. They looked at the median and the interquartile range, which is the middle 50% of the distribution. It's all about where the industry actually added those larger sizes. The researchers called this the outlier strategy.
The outlier strategy. How does that actually work in practice?
So imagine a bell curve representing all the models working in fashion. What the industry did was take the extreme right edge of that spectrum, and they just expanded it by occasionally hiring a plus-size model. And by the way, the industry defines plus size as just a U.S. dress size 12 and up.
Right. Which is wild on its own, but yeah.
Right. So by adding those few outliers to the far tail end of the curve, the overall range of sizes technically increased. The distance between the absolute smallest model and the largest model got wider.
Oh, I see.
But they left the central 50% of the distribution, the core of the bell curve, entirely untouched.
Wow. It's like, okay, it's kind of like a university boasting about its diversity by putting 5 international students on the cover of their admissions brochure, right? But then the other 9,000 students inside the actual classrooms are completely homogenous.
Exactly.
They change the marketing materials, but the actual everyday demographics of the hallways are perfectly identical.
That is a perfect analogy. The industry didn't change the foundational standard at all. They just added a few highly visible outliers to the extreme edges to make the spread look wider. The sort of factory default for what a model looks like has been totally frozen for a quarter of a century.
That is so deeply cynical. And what exactly is that factory default? Like, how thin is this frozen median we're talking about?
So, to truly understand the reality gap here, the researchers used a metric called relative fat mass, or RFM, to compare the models to everyday people using U.S. public health data.
Okay, quick question. Why use RFM instead of the standard body mass index, or BMI, that we always hear about from our doctors?
Yeah, so BMI is actually a very blunt instrument. It basically just divides your weight by your height squared, which can artificially inflate the body fat estimates for taller people.
Ah, right?
And since high fashion models are exceptionally tall, BMI can actually distort how thin they really are. RFM is much more precise because it uses the ratio of your waist circumference to your height. So it gives a far more accurate picture of actual body fat distribution.
That makes total sense. Okay, so when they calculated the RFM for the models over these 25 years, what was the magic number?
The U.S. female models cluster incredibly tightly at an RFM of around 18.4%, and there is almost no variance there.
Wait, 18.4% body fat for an adult woman? biologically, doesn't a body fat percentage that low start shutting down basic endocrine functions? Like, isn't that the threshold where you start seeing amenorrhea and real physiological distress?
It absolutely is. That sits firmly in the underweight, potentially medically compromised range. It is a highly specific, extreme biological phenotype.
Wow.
Now, compare that 18.4% to the average U.S. woman aged 17 to 30. That group clusters at an RFM of 38.5%.
38.5% versus 18.4%? I mean, that is a 20 percentage point gap.
Exactly. And the most shocking part of this entire 25-year data set is that this 20-point gap hasn't narrowed by even a fraction of an inch over 2 whole decades.
Not at all.
Not at all. The physiological distance between the bodies the fashion industry presents as, ideal and the actual bodies of the public has not shifted a single millimeter.
Well, honestly, no wonder the public health data on eating disorders hasn't improved.
Right.
We're still being sold the exact same mathematically impossible standard we were sold in the year 2000. They've just hired way better PR teams.
You hit the nail on the head, and this actually brings us to a fascinating and just deeply troubling intersection in Dr. Boucherie's research.
Right.
Because we established that the industry uses this outlier strategy for body size, right? And that they have also increased racial and ethnic diversity. But the researchers wanted to know, are these two types of diversity happening completely independently, or are they overlapping?
Oh, meaning like who is actually carrying the burden of being the plus-size outlier on the runway?
Precisely. And the data shows that non-white models are 4.5 times more likely to be cast as plus-size models than white models.
4.5 times. That isn't just a subtle statistical variance. That is a massive structural bias.
It really is. The researchers point out that since 2017, the gap in representation between white and non-white models in the plus-size category has widened significantly. So much of the industry's heavily touted size diversity is disproportionately borne by non-white models.
Well, okay, let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Sarah?
Are we totally sure this is a calculated strategy? Like, could this just be a slow, clumsy industry trying to figure out how to change? Maybe casting directors are just, I don't know, hiring whoever comes through the door from the agencies rather than intentionally trying to consolidate their diversity.
I mean, it's a fair question, but the sociological data points really heavily toward a concept called performative inclusion.
Performative inclusion.
Right. The fashion industry is under immense pressure to check multiple representation boxes. They need racial diversity, and they need size diversity to satisfy public demands. So by concentrating those traits onto individuals who are already marginalized, brands can satisfy multiple PR demands with a single casting choice.
It's like they're trying to kill two birds with one stone.
Exactly. It mathematically minimizes the amount of structural change the industry actually has to undergo. They don't have to change their core sizing for white models, who still make up the vast majority of the casting.
So they essentially use minority models to deflect criticism about their sizing standards while keeping the traditional, incredibly thin white ideal completely insulated right at the center of the curve.
Yep, the data strongly suggests that is exactly how the system is operating behind the scenes.
Which makes me wonder how this operates across the entire fashion ecosystem.
Yeah.
Because fashion isn't just one big monolith, right? You've got everything from the absolute highest-end Parisian couture all the way down to the fast fashion you buy at the mall. Does this mathematical illusion happen literally everywhere?
To answer that, the researchers mapped what they call a prestige hierarchy of brands. So they looked at the collaboration networks like who works for whom to objectively rank brands into elite, high, mid, and low tiers.
Okay.
And they found that the pressure to stay thin cascades through this hierarchy in very, very specific ways.
Let me guess. The elite tier plays by its own rules and aggressively gatekeeps the thinnest models.
They absolutely do. The most elite brands strictly gatekeep the thinnest models, but when you look at the hiring of plus-size outliers, you see a really surprising U-shaped curve across the tiers.
A U-shaped curve. How does that work?
Well, plus-size models are hired most frequently by the absolute elite brands at the top and the low-tier brands at the bottom, but the mid-tier brands avoid them almost entirely.
Wait, why would the elite brands hire them if they're the ones gatekeeping extreme thinness? That doesn't make sense.
Because the elite brands face the highest public scrutiny, they are the ones being critiqued in major newspapers and, huge social media campaigns. So they hire a few plus-size models for performative, highly visible diversity points. It generates positive
Yeah,
headlines,
well, okay.
right? And at the other end, the low-tier brands hire them because they are catering to mass market reality. They just want to sell clothes to everyday people.
Sure, they need clothes that fit real bodies. But what about that middle tier? Why is the bottom of the U completely empty?
The researchers hypothesize that mid-tier brands are basically engaged in aspirational climbing. They desperately want to be seen as elite. And they believe that mimicking the elite tier's core obsession with thinness is the way to signal prestige without taking the perceived PR risks of stepping outside the norm with outliers.
So for you listening right now, if you walk into a mid-tier mall brand, hoping to find clothes that fit a normal body, the data basically proves that brand is actively ignoring you. Like they aren't designing for you because they are too busy cosplaying as Prada to care about reality.
Exactly. It's a deeply entrenched systemic issue, and it's completely driven by the economics of prestige.
Which brings up a really crucial issue about public health policy. Because if the industry is just playing mathematical games to avoid changing, relying on them to self-regulate seems, frankly, completely hopeless. Has anyone actually tried to force them to change using the law?
They have, actually, and the paper provides a really brilliant comparison of two real-world laws that tried to fix this.
Oh, interesting.
So in 2006, Milan Fashion Week instituted a hard ban. They explicitly banned female models with a BMI under 18.5.
Okay, so just a hard numerical line in the sand.
Yeah.
You step on a scale, you either pass or you fail.
Yes, exactly. But then in 2017, France passed a very different kind of law. They required models to provide a medical certificate of overall health from a doctor, but they didn't specify any hard numbers or cutoffs at all.
Right.
It was just a flexible, holistic guideline left entirely up to individual medical professionals.
Okay, I feel like the data is going to tell a really clear story here.
Yeah.
Which one actually worked?
The data shows the Milan ban worked beautifully. Immediately following that 2006 intervention, the lower tail of extreme thinness in Milan shifted upward sharply compared to other cities. They essentially just chopped off the most dangerous extreme of the bell curve.
And why didn't the French law work? Because I assume, based on how you set this up, that it failed miserably.
It failed completely. Looking at the distributions before and after 2017 in Paris, there is just no visible change whatsoever. The trends track exactly with the rest of the unregulated industry.
Wow.
And the mechanism of that failure is pretty obvious when you think about it. Overall health is an incredibly subjective term. If you tell a doctor to evaluate health without a hard cutoff, it just creates a massive loophole.
Right, because the doctor might look at an underweight 19-year-old model and think, well, she has good cardiovascular endurance and no active diseases, and just sign the paper. Plus, let's be real, major fashion houses have the resources to just find accommodating doctors who will rubber stamp the certificates.
Precisely. The takeaway for policymakers here is incredibly clear. Hard numerical thresholds actually force structural change, while flexible, vague guidelines just let the prestige hierarchy keep doing exactly what it has always done.
This raises such an urgent question about where we go from here, because we now have empirical proof of a 25-year data set showing a rigidly unchangeable, artificially thin ideal. But those 800,000 images, they don't just disappear when the magazines go out of print. They are digital history now, so what happens to them?
This is where the research connects to our future in a really tangible, immediate way. Those 793,000 images. That is exactly the kind of massive, high-quality, perfectly indexed visual data set that is currently being used to train generative AI systems.
Oh, man. That is a terrifying thought, because generative AI models learn what concepts like beauty and fashion and aspirational mean by basically just looking at these historical data sets.
Yes, and the researchers explicitly warn about this. If AI systems are trained on a corpus where the median body is frozen at an underweight 18.4% body fat and where size diversity is mathematically linked to specific marginalized racial groups, the AI isn't going to recognize that as a bias.
No, it won't.
It's going to recognize it as a fundamental rule of aesthetics.
So if we go to an AI image generator right now and ask it to create a picture of a beautiful fashion model, it is going to spit back this mathematically rigid, artificially thin ideal. We are basically taking 25 years of structurally flawed beauty standards and hard-coding them into the foundational algorithms of our future technology. It's like automating the outlier strategy.
It really is. And it highlights exactly why systematic auditing of these AI training data sets is going to be so crucial for public health going forward. If we don't intervene, the AI will just endlessly replicate the illusion.
Okay, let's take a breath and zoom out for a second,
Yeah.
because we have covered incredible ground today.
Hmm.
We set out to find if our beauty standards have actually changed over the last 2 decades or if our eyes were just playing tricks on us.
Right.
And thanks to this massive investigation, we discovered that while the packaging certainly changed, we are definitely seeing more diverse faces,
Hmm.
and we are seeing extreme size outliers strategically placed on the runways. The core product, the impossibly thin ideal at the center of the curve, hasn't moved a single millimeter in 25 years.
It's a really profound realization about how our visual culture works. True inclusion requires shifting the center, not just decorating the margins. Symbolic diversity, it satisfies PR demands, it generates likes on social media, but it does absolutely nothing to alleviate the very real, very dangerous psychological toll these images take on the public every single day.
Which leaves us with a final lingering thought to chew on. We just talked about how AI is going to lock this 18.4% body fat ideal into our digital future. But let's look at our biological future for a second. We're currently living through the sudden, explosive rise of GLP-1 weight loss drugs like Ozempic.
Oh, absolutely.
So if the fashion industry's ideal body has been mathematically frozen in this underweight, biologically extreme state for 25 years, and now the general public suddenly has access to pharmacological tools that can aggressively push their bodies toward that extreme, what happens next? Are we about to see a mass biological convergence where everyday people finally catch up to this mathematically engineered artificial median? And if we do, will the fashion industry simply move the goalposts again, creating an even more impossible standard just to maintain their precious prestige hierarchy?
That is the million-dollar question.
It really is. Thank you for joining Deep Dive Lab. If you loved uncovering the scientific mystery with us, be sure to follow and subscribe for more fascinating science stories. See you next time.